All right, we're live. Flyover Footy on a Thursday night, preview in Houston, and God knows what else. Man, we'll get going on the podcast once a few people join and we get going, Stu. But this is a much more of a jam-packed episode than I thought when I woke up this morning. I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah, it sounds like there's going to be some big news hopefully coming down the pipe, but we'll see.
I was thinking, I was talking to one of my friends that lives near me, and he was like, yeah, how many times have you had to rewrite those show notes? And I said, you know what? The funny thing is I was pushing Phil here and there to start doing this on Wednesday nights to like free up Thursdays, just because Thursday is a day that, I just kind of like to relax on Thursdays, and not that this isn't relaxing, but it's a little different. So I was trying to push Phil for Wednesdays, and then nights like these where it's like, there's so much that happened on a Thursday that I feel bad about trying to do it on a Wednesday because we'd be missing out on so much stuff, right?
Yeah, and I thought you were going to say you never stop changing the show notes, because you don't. They're always whenever I check them out, you're always in there poking around.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of just keeping them open and then putzing around with them. I like to say that I'm a perfectionist, but I kind of probably make them worse as I edit them and try to work on a flow and pack them with too much information that I invariably get frustrated at because we can't get to all that good stuff.
Oh, looks like Chris Gephardt. Hey Chris, how you doing?
Evening, buddy. Thank you for joining as always, Chris. Stu, you ready to get going recording this podcast?
Yep, let's do it. Hopefully my furnace that just kicked on isn't too loud.
Nah, nice soothing, almost like a fireplace noise. We got you for 45, and then for our wind down, I'll probably mention it on the pod, but for our wind down, I'm gonna get into some. It's not coffee talk because that's what we call Fallout at 8 a.m. the day after games. And we'll maybe like a fireside chat thing about roster rules, whatever we want to call it. A nice pub chat or something. All right. Here we go. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker here on the Big 550 KTRS. We are sponsored for the entirety of the 2024 season by Noble Ice Vineyards. We are so happy to have them on board as we have a jam-packed episode. We have a Houston Dynamo preview. We have massive player updates that we learned from training. And we have finally enough information to talk about a potential new city signing. So we're going to spend some time on that. All of that before our wind down. If you're listening to us on the Big 550, be sure to listen to our podcast because our wind down is going to cover everything we know about the new roster profile that was released for St. Louis City. We're going deep into it. But to join me for at least the first portion of our pod is Stuart Hultgren. Stu, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm hoping this rain outside doesn't find its way inside during the recording, but we'll see if I have to run out and tamper down some towels here and there.
You know, the way this week has been going, that's kind of an evergreen thought because it feels like it's been raining this entire week in St. Louis, and I don't think it's going to stop. So probably good that the team's on the road this week, I would say.
Yeah, though that new grass field, I'm sure they love as much rain as they can get. So, but I mean, they're professionals regardless. I'm sure would have, if it was drought conditions, they'd have everything ready for the next home game.
No doubt. But let's get right into it because we have a lot to cover tonight, and we're going to start like we usually do, updating us on players. So getting the news that we found out as late as Thursday at training with the press conference on some player updates before we pivot to the two words that are probably on the tip of every single St. Louis City fan's tongue right now, Cedric Tuchert. Before we get to him, Bradley Carnell said this week that they don't want to tinker around too much with things coming off the bye week. They're working on a few things, evaluating some areas, but he called out a few players as progressing and was happy that they could have a free week to catch up. And he named Njabulo Blom, Josh Yaro, and Edu Leuven. He said that they used the time wisely. So looking at Leuven, Blom, and Yaro, all recovering from hamstring injuries. On Thursday, Edu Leuven and Njabulo Blom continued to train on a separate field together from the team. They were continuing to progress, working individually with a coach, moving dynamically in all directions from we could see. They were recovering from hamstring injuries, being a little more free-flowing. On Edu Leuven in particular, Stu, Bradley Carnell said, "I'm not at liberty to discuss Edu's private matters, and I'll leave it at that. but he's progressing with his injury. He's got the loads he needed to get this week, and I think he's getting himself in and around training-ish. And once we get him to a level to be around the group and train with the group, he has every support. Then when he's fit and ready to go, we'll reintegrate him. So it sounds like Leuven and Blom are both progressing, expecting them both to be out for this coming week. Also expecting to be out this week is Josh Yaro, who I would categorize him as behind the other two. He wasn't on the field at all training. We didn't see him individually. I saw him briefly step out of the training center on Thursday, but not doing anything on field that we could see. Good news, though, I would say Sam Adeniran. I covered him earlier this week on our midweek report, but Stu, it sounds like Sam Adeniran is starting to blow over. He's back at training. Everything really seems as good as it can be at this point. Both parties seem to be moving on. That's obviously good for St. Louis, right?
Oh, absolutely. You want a happy and productive Sam if you can. I think Carnell handled it as well as we could have. We don't know the behind the scenes and everything that happened there, and as long as it's water under the bridge, I don't think we need to. And hopefully Sam bags a brace against Houston, and I'm sure that would heal a lot of wounds.
We're going to get into what our lineups look like that Sam might play a part of, but no matter what role he plays, it's going to be a big game for Sam Adeniran. I talked to him earlier in this week asking him about Houston and the fact that this would be his first game back with the club since training on his own, coming back, and what that means to him. And he obviously said it means a lot, not just because he's back with the team, but Houston is where he's from, hometown, family. It's a big deal for him to be playing there in front of that crowd. And so whatever we get out of Sam is going to be awesome. Another player that we hope to see a whole lot of is Chris Durkin. Chris Durkin gave us a scare a little bit earlier in the week when he was held out from training on Tuesday after sustaining a knee contusion in the scrimmage with City 2 last Saturday. But by Thursday of this week, he seems like he was back with the team. He was on the field. He was in the press conference room. Bradley Carnell, when I asked him about Chris Durkin, said, he's in the room. That's a good sign. Every hour is valuable. It's going to be a game time decision. We'll get him ramped up and ready and see if he can play. And if he can play, he's in contention and he'll be able to play. So expecting that if the fitness checks out, he's going to start. I think that's the reading between the lines. Bradley Carnell did say that regarding the midfield depth, everything's fluid. He credited minutes guys got against City 2 this past week in the scrimmage as giving everybody a little bit of an option. So presenting Jose Kojima, Akil Watts, maybe seeing AZ or Indy popping in there, Carnell said, if Durkin can't go. But right now, Carnell said we're planning with him, meaning Chris Durkin. And that's obviously huge for not just the St. Louis midfield, but everything, as Chris Durkin has played such a huge role for St. Louis, right?
Yeah, I mean, what the story was, he has the most tackles. Well, most tackles on the team, but
and touches too.
And touches, yeah.
Yeah.
He's clearly important. I think he endeared himself deeply to the fans immediately, and just his fire would be missed out there if he can't go.
No doubt. And Stu, let's pivot over a little bit to Cedric Tuchert. Before we get into the Houston preview, we have to touch on this. This is one of those things that it might be incredibly outdated in just about 12, 13 hours from when we're doing our live stream on Thursday night. By the time you're listening to this on the Big 550 KTRS, maybe we've signed Cedric Tuchert. I don't know. But a few things that we do know at this point in time as we're recording this. Hanover 96 has confirmed that Cedric Tuchert is leaving and moving abroad. They tweeted out today, Thursday, that Cedric Tuchert will no longer play for Hanover 96 next season. He has decided on a new sporting adventure and is planning to move abroad. Now that's translated, but all signs point to that being a good translation into what Hanover, his club, said. Moving abroad, reading between the lines, obviously a move to MLS. Seems like it's in the workings for that. Furthermore, on Tuchert, we have a report from Sarah Wiskarek from Sky Sports saying Cedric Tuchert is about to move to the MLS. The 27-year-old striker will join St. Louis City SC in the summer and will sign a contract until the end of 2026. Tuchert will move on a free transfer announcement soon. Seems like the smoke is meaning there's a fire somewhere in this. Add on to that, Stu, our friend Manuel Veth with Transfermarkt had an article that he posted saying Cedric Tuchert set to join St. Louis City SC. There are still other clubs in the running, so nothing has been signed that we've been informed of yet. However, the word in the article is that not just the new adventure abroad, not just moving abroad from what Hanover said, but It's St. Louis City in the forefront. There are other clubs interested, including at least one other MLS club. And the report by Build suggesting a salary in the 7-figure range may be exaggerated. Of course, we know St. Louis has been reported to not be interested, or at least be reluctant, when it comes to paying designated player type salaries. So the reports of a 7-figure or multi-million-dollar deal, we're just going to have to wait to see what the MLSPA reports from that, and if he's announced as a designated player, if and when the contract is signed. A couple of notes on Cedric Tuchert, though. His current contract with Hanover goes until the end of June. Standard contract in Europe, so you go through the end of the season, contract ends in June. July 1st, you are free to sign another contract. July 18th is the big date the St. Louis City fans need to be aware of, because that is the opening of the secondary transfer window, where international transfer certificates can be registered in MLS. And so having that transferred over means he'll be eligible to play. So that's July 18th. If this gets announced this week, next week, that's fantastic. Tuchert, no matter what form he's in, will not be eligible to play for St. Louis until, at the earliest, the Sporting KC game right before Leagues Cup. But in all honesty, this is probably going to be a Nuke v. Thorson situation. He's going to be available post Leagues Cup for St. Louis. Stu, thoughts on Cedric Tuchert and just this seem to be whirlwind type reports that are really picking up steam now?
Well, that's how it always seems to happen with transfers, where there's occasional rumors here and there, and then just out of nowhere, everything kind of just snowballs into announcements or rumors or this or that. But it always happens fast when it happens. With Tuchert, I was actually thinking, now I don't think LAFC necessarily needs him, but Steve Cherundolo was the U17 and U19 coach over there. I don't know if Tuchert ever played with those youth rosters. He was only ever on their senior squad. But that was the first one I thought about. Cherundolo would obviously have the connections and be familiar with him. But I've also seen reports that Edu is one of his best friends.
Yes.
Have you heard that? Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's obviously a huge thing if you're coming to a new country, if you know someone, especially a close friend. I mean, more firepower is always good. But of course, like you said, have to caution a little bit that we'll need patience. If he does sign, it'll be a while from now. And then you probably want to give him some time to settle in and get to his form. But maybe he'll light it up right away.
And that form has been looking pretty good. He's been plagued with a little bit of an injury concern, so his minutes have not been the highest in the 2 Bundesliga for Hanover this year. He hasn't seen as much time because of that, but when he has seen time, he's been scoring a goal every 110 minutes. This is a guy who in the 2 Bundesliga this year has 11 goals to lead the team, leading Hanover in 12 starts, 25 matches played. Last year, he had 14 goals in 19 starts, 29 matches played. He's a goal scoring threat. He lines up and he previews as a Nico Gioacchini type replacement. He's a center forward by trade, good off the ball, and his stats really line up well in what you can see benefiting St. Louis. He's really top compared to forwards in progressive passes, progressive carries. He has shot creating actions that are just lining up in his resume. He compares, if you look at FBref, compares to players like Chicho Arango, like Hani Mukhtar. So you're seeing a playmaker off the ball and a finisher on the ball. There's a lot to like about how he might line up with Klaus. He's 27 years old, so he would be coming here. I don't see how he wouldn't be coming here on a pretty decent contract. And by all accounts, this would be a huge bolster for St. Louis in their attacking core on the other side, probably of Leagues Cup.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago, you were mentioning just how the roster is built for. You were mentioning online on Twitter about how our roster is built for some flexibility, and Tuchert coming in is kind of an example of that, how we can grow our roster with bringing in a player with him. I'm looking at his stats, and one that caught my eye was his successful take-ons, which is 0.85 per 90 minutes, which is the 66th percentile, which is pretty good. And I think that would be something I would really like to see what he brings there, because I mean, honestly, that's always fun to see a guy take on another guy and beat him.
He's good on the ball and he's good passing. I mean, this is a guy whose stats really line up well in the upper percentiles against other forwards in multiple ways. Like, he's not just give the guy a ball like Sam and let him go one-on-one. He really seems like he plays well in space and he can complement a guy like Klaus. All right, Stu, you ready to pivot over to Houston Dynamo preview?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So Houston, the last time we played them was obviously very injured. We rotated heavily in our CONCACAF Champions Cup match, so it's really hard to draw a whole lot of takeaways from the Houston Dynamo when we played them in Houston last. And CONCACAF Champions Cup in general, there was a lot of managing minutes and beginning of the season. So between their injuries, our rotation, we started Kajima, Nerwinski, and Wenzel and Akil Watts the last time we played them out, if that tells you anything about what we threw at them. But Houston, they've been getting healthy. They've been making signings. So as they've signed players like Jefferson Valverde, who has not arrived to the U.S., they're still out Nelson Quinones, their U22 winger, who's out for the season with a knee injury, but they are getting healthier. Ache, Sebastian Ferreira, two of their key playmakers and really driving forces on how they can be at their most elite, returned against Austin 2 weeks ago. Today, on Thursday rather, Hector Herrera was working with a weight sled prior to their team training, so he seems like he may be ready to step back into that starting lineup. Sebastian Ferreira, their striker, though, working separately. Sebastian Kovalchuk is a likely replacement if he can't go, but Ferreira, who has been subbing in the past couple of games, seems like he could be back on track. It depends on, he might be in a Chris Durkin type situation. So Houston's getting healthier, and they're getting some more consistency in their roster. But if you look at how both of these teams are, they're in similar situations, too. St. Louis City comes into this match 9th in the West after their bye week last week. They are 2-1-6, 12 points, a +1 goal differential. Their away record this year, they're still looking for their first away win. 0-1-3. Their only loss of the season came away to RSL 5 weeks ago. So they're riding another one of those unbeaten streaks. Last 3 games for St. Louis, just to reflect before the bye week: the draw to FC Dallas, defeated Austin 1-0, and they drew SKC 3-3 before their bye. Houston, on the other hand, 8th in the West, 1 spot above us on a 4-4-1 record. So they're kind of like St. Louis of last year. They win or they lose. They haven't been drawing very much. They have 13 points, a -1 goal differential, and are 2-2-1 at home. Their form in the last 3 games: they've defeated Minnesota 2-1 away. They fell to Austin FC 1-0 at home, and they lost a second in a row last week against FC Dallas 2-0, but it's hard to take away from much in that, since Griffin Dorsey, their right back, went down, or was red carded rather, about 4 minutes in, and so they went down to 10 minutes, giving up 2 goals in that regard. So that really leads to their big story coming into St. Louis. They're going to be without their right back, Griffin Dorsey, picking up a red card on a Dogzo situation, denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity, an immediate red card. He's a big loss for them. He has started all 9 games from them, one of their very few only players who has been healthy enough and quality enough to start all 9 games. So being without him opens up a whole lot of possibilities. Do you see that as being the big key thing to watch for, or some of these other players returning, Hector Herrera? Where do you see the big story when it comes to the Houston Dynamo?
You mentioned their form, and I'll get into their players, but they're such an interesting team because they're a little bit better away than they are at home. Mm-hmm. They're two wins, 1 draw, and 2 losses at home, like you mentioned, which puts them 10th in the league in home form. So that's actually obviously good news for us. But Dorsey being out is a big one for them, and he also got fined. I don't know if you saw, for some of the comments he made.
Yeah. And he was failing to leave in a timely manner, I think, was part of it too. So there's a lot going on with him in that play.
Yeah, I'm sure he got a talking to by some of the team officials afterwards. With the new rules in place as well, he especially likes to get off the field. So I think Dorsey connects well with Aliyu. So without Dorsey, I don't know exactly who's going to step into that right back role. Who's their backup right back at the moment?
I think they were throwing out a center back. Last time I saw, it was Daniel Steris who stepped in. If he didn't play right back, he played right center back when they went back last week. But because he's played just about every game, he started every game and played just about every minute, it's really hard to say who they might throw out there and feel comfortable with in that spot, at least to me.
Yeah, I mean he's a talent. He's a great player. I believe he went to Indiana. So Yeagley does great development work there.
Yep.
And we're familiar here in St. Louis with a lot of IU players, a lot of St. Louis kids go to IU over the years. Just I know he was recently called into the U.S. national team camp, I believe.
I think you're right.
Camp Cupcake call maybe.
Yes. But the Houston Dynamo team, I think, since St. Louis saw them last, and it's not just the consistency of Griffin Dorsey, but they've been consistent in some other things too. They've been struggling to score. So they've had the lowest goals scored in the West, but they also have only scored more than one goal in 2 of their 9 games in MLS, at Minnesota and against San Jose at home. This is a team that is consistent in their inability to find net, but they're playing some pretty soccer, I would say. So that's something that people said in the offseason about Benny Ball, Ben Olsen, their coach, and it's continued into this season. They're near the top of the league in total passes, both short and medium, and accuracy, as well as accurate long passes. So they're kind of clinical when it comes to the possession that they keep. They're clinical in trying in. Oh boy.
We lost you for a second there, Matt.
Yeah, I think my internet just went out. That was fun. Are you there, Stu?
Yeah, I'm here.
It even threw away my camera. Second. There we go. Okay, can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you're still getting a little bit of a video delay.
Okay, well, this could be fun. Thanks, St. Louis weather. Really appreciate that. All right, let's see if I can jump back in there. This is the really fun part about doing this live. Okay, I think I was talking about their. Yeah, we'll see if I can cut this. So this could be an interesting listen to on the podcast. Yeah, Houston is near the top of the league in total passes, both short and medium passes. They're accurate in those as well as accurate in their long balls. But the way that they do that is by keeping possession. And so they play pretty ball. Benny ball is a very pretty style of soccer to play. It doesn't result in much, or at least it hasn't been resulting in much in 2024. But in addition to just leading the league in a lot of possession categories, they're really focused on keeping possession, passing the ball around, drawing in the defenders. And so that's where I think we're going to get into some of the ways that St. Louis's style clashes with Houston. Is Houston looks to draw you in, and then they look to open it up accurately into space, sending it long to Aaliyah, some of those longer passes in behind the lines. Chris Durkin even told us today, they're hard to score against. If we're able to control their midfielders more, that'll be a good advantage for us. At times when we went there last time, we let them pass the ball around a little bit too easy. We're a little bit more in their face, and a game on our terms, chippy, physical, it could be a good game for us. So I think that's a key that I'm going to get into later, Stu, is the fact that they are accurate with all these passes and they have high volume passes. They keep possession a lot, but it's going to be on St. Louis to make them uncomfortable enough and to be a lot more clinical with how their back line protects against a team that likes to play the way Houston does, often deep in their own zone, to draw you in. So it's a fascinating look at how this team wants to play soccer.
Yeah, and I think Aliyu actually leads the league in offsides. Or he's up there. So they're definitely going to be aggressive, like you said, but also he doesn't quite have his timing down, and which I think is good because once he gets it down, he's going to cause a lot of trouble for various defenders in the league.
That's going to be something to watch too, because the way that we've allowed some goals have been in behind our back lines on some of those runs where we get caught a little too high up. And so if Aaliyah can be a little more clinical in his timing, that could pose a problem for St. Louis. And then in addition, it's just seeing for St. Louis, at least, how are they going to respond after their bye week? We don't have very many examples of St. Louis coming into a match after a bye week mid-season. In 2023, they had in games where they had at least the week prior off, it was losing to the Fire 2-1 in the U.S. Open Cup in a midweek May match. It was defeating Austin 6-3 after Leagues Cup, and it was losing to Seattle after an international break in October 2-0. So there aren't very many examples in how a Bradley Carnell side responds to having a week off, but you hope that this scrimmage against City 2 last week is an indicator of what he tried to learn from last year, I would say, in keeping his team sharp, in giving minutes to folks, especially because he's also managing looking ahead in the next couple of weeks where he has another midweek match against LAFC here in May. I think that going back to Chris Durkin, who we heard from, I think a lot of this is going to depend on if Chris Durkin can play. Knowing that he's probably going to go into the weekend with a questionable designation plays a big factor in, are you going to see Durkin and what we've seen from him so far, or is this going to be a Jose Kojima first MLS start opportunity, first MLS regular season start rather? Akil Watts, AZ, Indy, guys that Carnell mentioned as they can step in. It's going to be interesting to see that battle. Spoiler for later on in the pod, I mentioned this is the midfield battle is where I see a huge battle taking place, and that could be one of the key focuses in who wins the midfield. Because, like Chris Durkin said, if they can make it on their terms, be physical, disrupt them, then the key things that Houston does, led by, and we go into the players now, Stu, led by Artur, can be a little less effective, and they can be less clinical in progressing the ball, because if they can possess the ball deep in their own end without finding those outlets, that's what St. Louis wants to do. So is it Artur, or looking at some of these Houston Dynamo players, who's on your radar as this is a guy who can really hurt St. Louis, or we need to focus on shutting down this guy or guys?
Well, Ache is the one that's obvious. I did like Aliu and how he was playing against us previously in the season. And as you said earlier, like, he's going to push us hard. So seeing how our center backs communicate is going to be really important. Make sure they're tight on the line.
Definitely.
Now, Dorsey was the one I was looking forward to seeing. I always like watching him play. Steve Clark, while not an offensive player, he is great at getting underneath people's skin as their starting goalkeeper. He got a lot of flack for his time wasting during the Champions Cup here in St. Louis, and also he has a interesting haircut that always gets him a lot of flack from opposing fans.
Very noticeable.
Yeah, he has a little bit of a Padawan tail on his hair.
A Padawan tail. Nice. I like that. Really appropriate for this weekend with May the 4th. That's a good shout. Stu, some of these guys, I think, speak to, they're important to Houston, but not in the way that is really leading them to finish. Ibrahim Aliyu leads their team in goals, but he only has 3. Klaus and Salio both have 3 for us, for instance. When I look at some of these guys and how they've been effective and the big players for them, I look at Amin Bassi, who he's been playing either on the wings, depending on injuries, or central midfielder. They're number 8 on his jersey, so watch for Amin Bassi. He's tied 3rd in the entire league for successful crosses, which is a fascinating stat. And it leads into some of the other stats that we're going to get into about how Houston progresses the ball in ways that they like to move. But going back to just the way that they pass with these short, medium passes and how they like to deliver service into the box. I mean, Bassi is a guy who, if he gets the ball out wide, you need to be watching for where he's going to be setting the ball, because tied 3rd in the entire league successful crosses, he's going to be looking inside towards Aliyu, towards Sebastian Ferreira, anybody making a run in. So he's dangerous on the wing. Ibrahim Aliyu, just like you said, he's 2nd in the league in offside calls. So he's going to be making those runs, whether it comes from service from Artur in the midfield or from Bassi on the wing. This is a guy who has been playing on the left for Houston, but he can also play up top, depending on how their injuries are. So he's a guy looking to get in behind. He's a U22 initiative. The number 18 is what he wears, so watch for Ibrahim Aliyu. Ache, you called him. He hasn't seen much action, but he's a difference maker when he gets on the field, and it could end up where he starts his first game of the season against St. Louis. We could be that team for him. Assist-wise, so where the key passes come from? They come from Artur. Artur, Amin Bassi, and Coco Carrasquilla lead their team in assists. Artur leads the team in completed passes with a whopping 558. Juxtapose that against Tim Parker in St. Louis with 279 completed passes. That's a microcosm of just how much Houston possesses and passes the ball around. They have two players with over 500 completed passes. St. Louis's top players with completed passes are Parker with 279, Durkin with 254. It's night and day. And that goes into the night and day of the teams. Possession wise, Houston is second in the league with overall possession, 57.9%, second only to the Columbus Crew, right there with Inter Miami. These teams that you're familiar with, as in loving to possess the ball. We just saw the Columbus Crew against Monterrey in the Champions Cup. We know how they play. Houston loves to keep the ball just as much. 7 of their 9 matches played have had more than 52% possession, with 3 of those matches more than 60% possession. This could play into St. Louis's benefit, as St. Louis has 6 of 9 matches with less than 45%. We know that they don't like to possess the ball. They like to play off of it. So is this, in your opinion, Stu, would you say this is a strictly a benefit to St. Louis? Because you could probably make the same kind of argument for Houston, in that St. Louis isn't a team that wants the ball. And so as long as Houston is clinical in keeping the ball away from St. Louis's press, drawing them in, you could really see how this could benefit Houston. Is it really going to come down to who's more effective in their game plan, who's able to implement it better, or do these styles benefit one team versus the other?
I mean, I'm always confident in Carnell and our style of play. In the chat, Jerry Hayes said, ugly trumps beautiful soccer.
Yeah.
And Houston's simply not scoring this year. 5 goals at home in 5 matches, and they've given up 5. So got to trust to what Carnell puts out there. I think if Aliu's on the left side, matching up against Tottenham's going to be interesting as well. I don't think we talked about that. I don't know Aliu's size, but I recall he's a pretty big dude. 1.8.
Tottenham's a guy who plays good two-way soccer, and you can't count him out on any of those battles, I would say.
Oh yeah, an absolute legend after that Sporting KC match. That was, man, what an ending. Amazing. Yeah, Tottenham's another guy who is very quickly become a fan favorite. I see. Hopefully he'll be around for a long time. Not just whatever team executes. I mean, there's always so many different factors that goes into it. I mean, any injuries that start off early. Does Steve Clark get booked early on for time wasting or something that causes some sort of hesitation, or how Klaus is going to match up against Bartlow and Mikel is going to be interesting to see as well, because Bartlow was pretty quick, but I don't recall Mikel being very quick at all.
I think some of those wing battles are going to be really interesting because a lot has been made this week of the dynamicism of both of our wings. We have Totland and Alm connecting so well, the Scandinavian connection right there that has been proving dividends since Alm is healthy and Totland is doing exactly what we brought him in to do and more. But on the other side, Anthony Marcanic and Celio Pompeu have really grown into quite the connection. And I would argue that it's not as I would say apparent or maybe flashy as Alm or Totland. But when you look at how we've been possessing the ball, it's through the left side more so. Durkin has been playing a huge part in this, along with Tim Parker, in how we move the ball to begin our possessions. But Anthony Marcanic moving that ball up the left side has had far more touches overall than Thomas Totland. And Totland has been, I would say, more effective in how he's creating chances with the ball. But you can't discount either of the wings, and that plays a huge factor for St. Louis and how deep they can get Houston. Houston might drop back into a low block, but if you are dangerous from both sides and you are forcing Houston to respect not just a dangerous right side like we know Alm and Totland can be and have been, but Celio Pompeu and Anthony Marcanic on the left, it creates a lot for a guy like Klaus to get in behind the lines, or it creates a lot for Tomas Ostrak to move in the midfield. And when you have that space that you create by both wide areas being dangerous, that benefits St. Louis more than anything else. And that might be where a guy like Griffin Dorsey being out is the biggest hindrance. I asked Carnell if that plays a factor, knowing that they're going to be missing that key piece. Because does that allow you to game plan differently? Do you target their right side? Do you know that they're going to be weak and potentially trying to cover that with their midfielders, like Artur might be shading? And while Cardell was very, cards close to the chest, I do think that has to play into it. He's not going to give anything away, and he didn't give anything away in how they game plan. But I do see that as something that is a factor to watch. Their right side. So what can Saleo do in trying to get behind some of those lines?
Yeah, and I think they're right back. I know we're going to get into lineups a little bit later, but just the more I dig into their lineup or their roster, I think it'll be Franco Escobar, right-footed fullback. He's played right back before. He's played left back for Houston so far this year.
You think they'll move him over?
Yeah, I think so. Just looking at how they approached last week, and obviously last week was a bit crazy with that early red card, but he does seem to be their preferred choice there.
Makes sense. I'm going to show for the folks on our live stream, because while you might be listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS or on our podcast, I do like to throw these out here every once in a while. On our live stream, I'm showing a picture of sequences, passes per sequence, overall directness. This is one of the images that I draw a lot of our stats from. And the analysis that I love to get into for at least a few minutes is the sequence time, the passes per sequence, and the direct speed. So this is a very difficult to read graph because of how wide it is, but the fact that it's so wide, I'll draw your attention, if you're watching, to the top left and the bottom right quadrants. Exact opposites in this play style graph are St. Louis City and the Houston Dynamo. St. Louis has the lowest sequence time in all of MLS in how long their sequences last. They have the second fewest passes per sequence behind DC United. And now they have the quickest direct speed in MLS. Teams like DC and LAFC drop below them after playing last week. So St. Louis is the quickest speed moving the ball up the field. They have the lowest time of possession per sequence and the second fewest passes. So this is a team that has now, through 9 games, proven to do exactly what they did last year. And they're able to consistently perform well overall in this style of play, where Houston is completely opposite. They have the second highest sequence time and the second highest passes per sequence behind LA Galaxy. They are the slowest direct speed team in the entire league. Houston's very methodical. Those passing stats we talked earlier, in how accurate and effective they are in their completed passes and where they like to possess the ball, that's further backed up by this analysis, saying that they take the ball deep in their own zone, they work it around. They're not at all concerned about being quick and moving the ball up. They will take their time in finding their openings. The other interesting stat that I really liked from what I was looking on Opta is PPDA, passes per defensive action. And this is you have to go under the hood to really understand this stat for this game. St. Louis, we know they're the fourth lowest. We talk about St. Louis every week, fourth lowest in PPDA, meaning that they allow the fewest passes, fourth fewest passes per action until they take a defensive move. So they engage the ball on a tackle, on a challenge. Fourth fewest in the league. So they press high. That's what indicates the high press, is they are very adept at moving on the ball quickly when a team is possessing. Houston, though, is 11th lowest. So they're not too far below St. Louis in the fewest passes allowed before they attempt a defensive action. But if you look at where they're doing that on the field, it is not the same as St. Louis. St. Louis engages high up on the field, really high up, 40 yards from their opposing goal, the attacking third. Houston engages teams in the midfield or even in their own defensive end. So they might allow teams, not allow teams rather, to pass the ball very, very much before a defensive action, but teams get really deep on Houston. And so it's not indicative of Houston being a high pressing team at all. Teams are just progressing the ball quicker, allowing Houston to engage very quickly in a low number of passes. That's all it is. The overall number of high turnovers is one of my key stats of this matchup. High turnovers forced is the number of sequences that start in open play and begin 40 meters or less from the opponent's goal. It is indicative of St. Louis in their high up the field, pressing, creating turnovers. St. Louis has 104 of those through 9 games. They're the second most in the entire league in high turnovers forced. The Chicago Fire is the only team that's higher than them, but the Fire have an extra match played. So all things considered, St. Louis is the best at high turnovers forced in MLS. Houston, while they may be pretty similar to St. Louis in passes per defensive action, They only have 50 high turnovers forced through 9 games, third fewest. They do not engage in high presses. They will drop back, and that's what St. Louis has to deal with. The other key stats, Stu, I have of the night is the number of switches. Because of all the different passing stats, whether it's completed passes, long, short, mid, that the stat that tells me the most about what Houston might be doing and to look for in this match are passes that travel greater than 40 yards the width of the field. St. Louis, unsurprisingly, is last in the league with just 9 switches through 9 games. It's kind of absurd when you think about it. Houston leads the league with 64 switches through 9 games. That's another opposite end of the spectrum analysis that leads Houston to be methodical, but if nothing's working on, let's say, the left side, they have no qualms with drawing you in and switching it over to the right to begin their attack from a different side of the field. They'll do that regularly. 64 through 9 games, they're averaging over 7 per game. We're going to see switches a lot. The field is going to be spread after they try to draw you in your press. So, do these stats, do you think, do they benefit St. Louis, or is this another case where St. Louis is going to be facing a low block and we're going to be tasked with trying to figure that out?
It's definitely going to be interesting. I'm just thinking about how Marcanic sometimes gets drawn in on while he's playing up high, and whether or not the cross, well, that would be a cross from probably Escobar over to that left side, and if Marcanic can get beaten, that'll be an interesting thing to say. I'm not entirely sure that our play style necessarily I mean, I trust Carnell Ball. But
Sure.
now that you mention it and more you dig into these stats, man, I absolutely hate it when we go up against a low block. I hope that's not the case. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, they engage in their defensive end, not just engaging the defense, but they seem like they just like to live out of there. They build from the back so often, and this just seems like because they're going to run probably a 4-2-3-1. Bradley Carnell knows. He said during his press conference they like to possess the ball. They have a lot of intricate passes in the midfield. They have good fluid play. They can create dangers in the wide areas, but even without Griffin Dorsey, they're still a dangerous team. I look to Artur as the guy to watch in how the ball gets progressed because he leads the team in passes, like I said, but he can enable the fullbacks to push higher. And if he's enabling like a Franco Escobar or whoever the other fullback is to push higher where he's controlling the flow of the ball, that's where something like Tomas Ostrak or even Klaus can really play a difference. Indiana Vasilev maybe in the central attacking midfield. Maybe that's Indy's guy is going after Artur and then disrupting him. The overlaps that they're going to run aren't going to be the fastest in the world, but I think they are going to try to draw in City's press and then look to spread the ball based off of that. And unfortunately, Stu, we are nearing time for what we have on the Big 550 KTRS leading into the City Houston game. So let's jump right into our predictions for the starting 11. I'm going to throw out Houston's and what I see from them. We know that Griffin Dorsey is out, so Franco Escobar is going to start on one of those fullback sides. Mikhail Eric Sviatchenko. My gosh, I'm butchering names tonight. Eric Sviatchenko. And I had Daniel Steres replacing Griffin Dorsey, but you never know how that other fullback spot is. Either Franco Escobar and insert fullback here. Artur and Ache are going to be their central mids if Ache is able to go. If he's not, look for Jan Gregus, who has played pretty well and been basically their only depth at central midfield if Ache can't start. Ibrahim Aliyu, Amin Bassi, and Coco Carrasquilla would be their attacking mids. And if Sebastian Ferreira can go, he's starting up top. I'll give you first go at St. Louis's starting lineup, Stu.
Okay. I think the only addition I have to Houston is I think we might see Tate Schmidt as well. If Escobar shifts over to the right, Schmidt starting on the left side. I like Bartlow as a player too, but you're right. Sviatchenko is likely getting the start there. I know we talked earlier off air, and I think we have pretty similar mindset here. I think Berkey, Marcanic, as we've mentioned, Nielsen, Parker, Totland on the right, Durkin if he's healthy, and I think he's going to do everything he can to make himself available to play. Ostrak, Pompeo, Indy, Rasmus Holm, and Klaus up top. Though the question is who starts if Durkin's out, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the easy consensus. It's very similar, and it's the exact same lineup, ideally, as our last two. So keep it going. It's working offensively. We have a couple defensive holes on our back line that I think we can figure out. This was a good bye week to figure out how to maintain a high line on our defensive side without allowing, because that's going to be key. And you have Tim Parker who can direct that. Joachim Nilsson getting back to being fit because he was missing time still beforehand. He was working his way up. I think he's there. Chris Durkin, if he's not there for me, it's Jose Kojima. Do you think the other options, Stu, are going to be Akil Watts, Indiana Vasilev, or AZ Jackson? I don't like Indy dropping back. I think we've seen this year, Carnell, while he mentioned him in the press conference, he has really preferred Indy in the attacking mid role, so much so that Jose Kojima has seen time in that area as opposed to dropping Indy back. I think he's going to go with that route. And I would love to see Kojima get his first MLS regular season start if Durkin couldn't go, as sad as I would be to not see Durkin in there.
Yeah, definitely. But Kojima, if he plays, man, what a player.
Oh, so good. And he's getting better very quickly. So that's exciting to see. I think all things considered, we want to see consistency with St. Louis. We want to see Durkin healthy. And I think we've laid out a pretty good case of how St. Louis can take advantage of what Houston throws at them just by nature of who Houston is and what St. Louis has been clinically adept at. St. Louis is going to keep that high line, making sure they can't have any run-ins behind them, working the midfield. They need to own the midfield as much as possible. Houston needs to be isolated on their wings. In games that Houston has won, their entire front line has been averaging near even position. So if they can uneven their front line, getting Ibrahim Aliyu, for instance, isolated on the left side, these are beneficial to St. Louis. So there's lots of keys like that go into the game, but we're out of time for it now, Stu. This has been a jam-packed first 45 on Flyover Footy. If you're listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS, tune into our podcast version because we're about to go deep, or at least I am, on the roster profile. Maybe get some listener questions in from our live stream chat, and we just look forward to this Houston Dynamo game. Any parting words, Stu? Any final notes on the Houston Dynamo?
No notes, but do you want to get into our score predictions?
We better, because the last time I missed on this, I heard about it, and I hate missing on things like that. I do. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
I'll go first. Houston doesn't score at home, so I'm going to go 3-1.
Ooh, big one.
St. Louis, to be clear.
Right. I have been having a problem over guessing goals, but I do think Houston has struggled mightily at home. That stat I would mention at the very beginning, they've only had 2 games this season where they've scored more than 1 goal. And so I think we're looking at a 2-1 St. Louis win. I don't know that I'm ready to unleash the beast on St. Louis goal scoring. 3 goals against SKC was great, but I do think it's going to be a St. Louis win. I feel pretty good about how this is and the overall health of the St. Louis starting 11 that we've seen in the past few games.
Absolutely. Go City.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS, sponsored by Noble Ice Vineyards. For Stuart Holgren, my name is Matt Baker, and we will talk to you later. All right, Stu. God help me for editing that area of when the storm knocked out my internet for a moment. And boy, do I hope we are still recording this, because I am going to lose my ever-loving mind if something happened to the restream recording.
Then you'll get a special repeat Flyover Footy morning edition with Santi and Matt.
If you're listening to if you tune into the podcast having listened to the live stream and it's just me talking about everything you've just heard, it's because I lost the recording and I had to do it all myself in the middle of the night. So please hope to hear Stu on the podcast.
For the first time ever, hope to hear me. Okay.
Never.
You're out? Night? Yeah, I'm out. I am looking forward to hearing this incredibly deep dive into Professor Baker's roster rules and how that breakout is. It's always enjoyable hearing your wealth of knowledge on that. I swear that you are, outside of City's front office, the most knowledgeable on MLS roster rules in St. Louis.
I appreciate that. And I'm just way too OCD on everything. If I can't understand something that I'm passionate about, it drives me insane, even if it is obsessive compulsive to a fault. But yeah, there's some fun things we're going to dig into, so I'm excited.
All right. Have a good night.
All right. Talk to you later, Stu. And because it is the wind down, I will be right back. So similar things going on. I'll be popping the cap here in a moment. I'll be right back. And I'll say too, if you're tuning in on YouTube, Instagram, X, wherever we're doing this, and you have a question either about the roster rule or the roster profile that we have, or anything else, Houston, drop it in the chat. Drop me a comment, because I will probably pause whatever I'm doing to get to it, or work it into this breakdown of the roster profile. And as I bear with me for just a second, because I'm pulling up the MLS comms message that they sent out on this earlier. Bingo. And St. Louis's is here. Okay, if you're joining me on the live stream, here we go. Welcome back to the Wind Down. Hopefully you're listening to this either as you're winding down your workday, maybe on taking a 3-day weekend, or on Saturday even. But cheers to everybody. I'm drinking a Zwickel Light from Urban Chestnut tonight. And yeah, we are going to do exactly what I've been looking forward to for about 12 hours, maybe 11, as I'm recording this. It's just me. I lost my friends in soccer. Phil is on vacation. Santi is getting some exercise with tennis, and Stu is getting some well-earned sleep between school and child. So you have me, Matt Baker, to go over the roster profile for St. Louis City, accurate as of May 1st, 2024. MLS did the unthinkable. They released almost everything that we wanted them to release, discuss, as far as specific senior, supplemental, off-roster, homegrown, all the designations that we've been really wanting to know. That if you've looked on the MLS website, you know that it is far from accurate. It has never really been the source of truth that has been deserving. MLS has been really guarded when it comes to getting details out, allowing a hot stove type conversation to exist, like Major League Baseball, like the NFL, NBA. Point to any other Big Four sport in the United States in what you can talk about in the offseason. MLS has never done that. And so this is the first big step into giving insight into all of the team's makeups, and not just the overall team makeups, but nuances into it. Concepts like, who is a designated player that can and cannot be bought down? Who are the U22s? Who is an off-roster player, indicating certain homegrowns that are unavailable? You know, all these different things. Internationals, and how many you have international slots versus how many international players are rostered. All of these things are now known. In addition to contracts, you have the contract length and you have option years, all listed in a nice, clean image that MLS has put out. Now, the joke, and yes, Chris Gebhardt in the chat, the joke that's running is MLS did this because of all the flack that they're getting for Inter Miami. which Inter Miami does have a hilarious roster. If you go and look at it, they have a ridiculous amount of U22s. That was the first thing that jumped out to me about Inter Miami. MLS teams are allowed 3 U22s. They have 5 listed. So they're basically signing U22s. If one gets hurt, they replace them with a U22. So now they have all these U22s under contract. They're just spending money like it's going out of style. Inter Miami has, I think, 5 or 6 TAM level players, which is another thing that MLS threw out is they labeled players who have TAM applied to them, meaning they're making more than the senior budget amount per player, but less than a DP. So all these things are now a little bit more known, and that's exciting. So let's get into St. Louis City in particular, because that's what we all really care about. And for St. Louis City, what I'm going to do for the live stream is I'm going to take my face away from this, and I'm going to show the roster page. So hopefully you can see that. It might be a little small, maybe blow up your screen, zoom in, but let's dig into this. So the first thing that we have is the senior roster, the first 20 players. These are the players who their salaries are of a certain amount. They make essentially the most on the team. There's a minimum salary amount that you have to make. And all of the senior roster players, this is the big thing, all of the senior roster players and their salaries apply to the salary cap. The supplemental roster and the supplemental players do not apply to the salary cap. They're spots 21 through 30, and they don't apply to the cap. So you see the lower salaried players like Caden Glover, AZ Jackson, Jose Kojima, Anthony Marcanic, Christian Oliveras, Miguel Perez, Celio Pompeu, and Akil Watts. All of these players making on the lower end of the salary, so they're the supplemental players. Celio Pompeu, this is active as of May 1st, and so you can see his new contract is reflected there, 2026 and 2027 with the option. Looking at the top list of our senior roster, just diving into those players in particular and what their designations are. So on the right side of this table, you see designations like international slots, designated players, U22s, unavailable players due to loans. But on the big main senior roster page, the 2 bits of information that are specific here are TAM players, contract lengths. The TAM players for St. Louis City are Joakim Nilsson, Tomas Ostrak, and Tim Parker. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're making a max TAM. It's just TAM is being applied to these players to bring their salary in line with the max allowed that hits the budget, which is about $653,000. That's it. Tomas Ostrak, we know, makes in the $800,000 range. Nilsson and Parker over $1 million. Half of Parker's salary is still being paid for by the Houston Dynamo. So didn't get to quite make that joke on the main part of the pod, but Tim Parker, while his contract expires this year, is half his salary is being paid for by Houston. This is going to be a huge point of conversation for Tim Parker. And as we analyze, is he coming back? What that might look like in the future, because it will be a significant amount more St. Louis has to spend on Tim Parker in the next few years if we keep him versus what we've had the past 2 years. So the big stories for me, looking at this, the things that we didn't necessarily know, and the one that I think everybody has really been noticing and focusing on is Roman Bürki is listed as a designated player. There are 3 designated players for St. Louis City: Roman Bürki, Joao Klaus, and Edu Leuven. The one thing I mentioned that is really cool about what they did is they specified which of these are, I would say, true designated players that, because of their amortized transfer fee and salary on the length of their contracts, they cannot be bought down versus those who can. And this, along with just about everything else, is something that we have speculated on here at Flyover Footy and myself on social media. And everything that we've speculated on, minus Isak Jensen, has proven true. So I'm pretty proud of that. And the fact that Edu Leuven is confirmed to be able to be bought down means that the length of his contract, when you amortize his yearly salary plus his transfer fee, it is less than the 1.65, 1.7 that makes a DP a DP. So if you're making over that, then you can't buy them down with TAM. You're not a max TAM player. Roman Bürki is a max TAM player. So what is max TAM? What does that mean? If you haven't listened to our MLS 2.0 or any of our other things on Flyover Footy, max TAM just means it is in the MLS roster rules. You have a max budget charge per player, about $653,000. And then TAM, you can apply up to $1 million of TAM per player. And so the maximum amount of money that a player can be making while not on a DP salary per year is about $1.6, $1.7 million. That's Roman Bürki. So Roman Berkey can be bought down in that way, even though his transfer fee was a free. The big point on Roman Berkey is he was never really listed as a DP before. So this seems like brand new information that the club has never specified him as a designated player. They were not overt about it, not in the way of Edu Leuven, in fact. And a lot of our speculation is Roman Berkey could be classified as a DP because of his salary. And we do have an open DP slot. But if he's not being classified as a DP, that means we are spending $1 million in TAM on Roman Berkey per year. And that's always rubbed me the wrong way, because if you're looking at an open DP slot where you can move Berkey down, you can buy him down if you needed to, but you have an open DP slot, you have two options. You could either pay a penalty to MLS for having that slot be taken by a senior player over, I want to say 23, 24, and you pay a $150,000 penalty to MLS for filling that third DP with a senior level player, or you don't slot in Roman Berkey as a DP and you're spending $1 million in TAM to buy him down to fit into the budget. That's an $850,000 per year difference that you could be obviously using much wiser in other areas of the roster. Money is valuable, whether you call it fake money like GAM and TAM that exists only in MLS or otherwise. It's all valuable in how you construct your roster. So it always rubbed me the wrong way to think the city might be wasting or throwing away $850,000 if we have this open slot that we just don't need to go empty right now. And so this is the confirmation. And the team has specified that there's a term MLS has called a restricted DP. That's what Roman Berkey is. It is that type of a player where he's max TAM is the closest analogy to that. But restricted DP is something I hope MLS will start using, because it will help to categorize these DPs differently and understanding why St. Louis, along with other teams, I think Houston actually is one of the teams who has a similar player, like I want to say Eric Sviatchenko is a similar type player where he can be bought down in that same way. He's a restricted DP. And so that's the thing about Roman Berkey. It's fairly straightforward when you think about it like that, is they're using him in this slot to save $850,000 in money that can be allocated in MLS. To me, it's as cut and dry as that. But this is the brand new information. It does not prevent St. Louis from filling that third DP with a player like Cedric Tucker. So if we sign a player who is like Edu Leuven or Joao Klaus, and the money makes sense that we would be spending, we would need to move Roman Berkey off either to sign a player, or the dollar differences make sense. That's what it's really looking at. So it's that third DP slot. If they're not making DP money, it's just where are we getting the biggest benefit in money of MLS, and that's who's going to fill it. That's who's not going to fill it. It's pretty straightforward. The club, this insight is giving me a lot more reassurance into some things that we speculated on the club, and reinforces just how much they understand the nuances of MLS. Some other interesting things to note of this roster profile is AZ Jackson is a homegrown player for St. Louis City SC. How in the world, you might be asking yourself, can AZ Jackson, a player who grew up in the Red Bull Academy in New York, he played for Minnesota United, played for Minnesota United 2, and then we acquired him from Minnesota United. How can he be a homegrown player for St. Louis? Well, we acquired his homegrown rights. Straightforward as that. Do I know why this wasn't specifically announced by the club? No. But at the end of the day, this is something that follows AZ. Homegrown is a tag that you have with the league, MLS. And so once you're on a homegrown contract, that's the contract that moves back and forth. Some teams announce that they've acquired his homegrown rights. Some don't. But if you're acquiring a player who is on a homegrown contract with MLS, because remember, all of these contracts are with MLS. The teams just have the services of the players. If you acquire a player on a homegrown contract, you get him on that homegrown contract. It doesn't say he's homegrown to St. Louis. He's homegrown. And that's a benefit to AZ, because on that supplemental roster, you don't have a limit on homegrowns, but by being a homegrown player, he slots into that supplemental roster. His salary does not affect our overall budget hit in the salary cap. Good news all around. But little specification, and the fact that AZ is signed with an option year of 2025 also good for St. Louis. Another interesting fact is Isak Jensen, as it turns out, is St. Louis City SC's first U22 signing. Now, this could be a case of we just didn't ask the right questions. But we had asked previously, is Isak Jensen a young designated player? Because at one point, the MLS soccer.com roster listed Isak Jensen as a young DP. And that was flatly denied for now obvious reasons. Isak Jensen is a U22. He was signed for with St. Louis. I believe he was 17 years old, coming to City 2. And his contract value doesn't set the world on fire. He's not one of the higher paid players in the world, but this is still a case of we have an open U22 roster. And so we're going to put Jensen in that slot because it's going to save us a little bit of money. And so the U22, if you're under 22 years old, you have a salary cap hit of 150,000. Isak Jensen for St. Louis City SC is on a $228,250 guaranteed contract. It's not massive, but it's about $75,000 that St. Louis is saving on their salary cap hit just by using that designation where they have open slots anyway. So smart move, again, by putting him in that slot to leverage even a little bit of money because it still makes a difference. Chris Durkin, obviously the other U22, we acquired him on that contract. So in a same situation as AZ Jackson's homegrown contract, Chris Durkin's homegrown his U22 rather, moved to St. Louis when we acquired him. Very straightforward in that regard. Chris Gebhardt in the chat asks, are the option years all team options? Yes. The options in MLS contracts are all team options. That's Salio's. Is very specifically announced. So this is a club option for these contracts. Now, there's obviously discussions that occur, and you're not going to force a player to stay if they don't want to stay, I don't think. But when you see option years, it is club option. Another interesting thing on this table are the international slots. Now, most of this was known, and we've done a fairly good job of keeping track of this. Every single year in MLS, international roster slots reset quantity-wise. Every team is allowed 8 international roster slots to start the year, regardless of how many players are actually under contract. If you build a roster with 10, 11, 12 international players on multi-year contracts, it's up to you to figure out how to acquire more international roster slots in the coming years to fit those players on your roster. Otherwise, they're not eligible. So with St. Louis, they came into the season with 8. They acquired 1 from Nashville SC before the season. So they have 9 international roster slots. We know Edu Leuven and Joachim Nilsson acquired green cards, which brought them to an amount that was 1 less than what they actually had. They signed Jose Kojima. That was the one that they filled with. And they have Selmer Pedro and Isak Jensen out on loan. Now, loans do not give relief on salary. You still have to pay their salary. They still hit your salary budget, but they do give roster and international spot relief, meaning we can fill their roster slots and they do not count towards our international slots used. So total, we have actually 10 players who are quote unquote international players, but we only have 8 that are currently playing for City and actually hitting that 9 that we have. This also is a very key factor in the fact that Cedric Tuchert would take up an international roster slot. If we sign Tuchert, that brings St. Louis to 9 active players with their 9 international roster slots. It would also cause issues if we tried to bring back Isak Jensen or Selmer Pedro, as we'd have to acquire more international roster slots. Both of those players, though, if I had to give my gut reaction, I would say it's not likely we see either of those players. Selmer Pedro, just by performance and the way he seemed to be unceremoniously dropped in the depth chart before he left, he has not done anything to really flash brilliance on his loan. Isak Jensen, quite the opposite. He has flashed brilliance for Viborg, and he's shown up for Denmark's U23 side, I believe. He was called up. And so in Isak Jensen's loan deal, there exists, according to the Viborg sporting director, a purchase option. So all signs to me point to neither one of those players are likely to suit up for St. Louis City SC again, but for vastly different reasons. So all that to say is it leaves room for Cedric Tuchert, and we wouldn't have to acquire any more international roster slots in that case. I like the fact that just this in general gives us, not just me who I had kept my own spreadsheet, I'm one of those nerds who looks into everything I can there, but it gives everybody more of an opportunity to try to get into this as much as I have. And it doesn't require you to follow all of the specific news. It doesn't require you to jot down notes every time something is announced. Like when we acquire an international roster slot from Nashville SC, you don't have to remember that 7 months later. You can just look at this kind of a thing and see, okay, we have 9 international roster slots. And at the very worst, it's a static sheet. It's static information that's valuable on May 1st, and it provides information on May 1st. But you now have something to build off of. So now as we go into the summer transfer window and we have this rumor on Cedric Tukert, you can start to construct in your mind, like, okay, what are we going to need to do this summer? Are we not able to recall Pedro or Jensen? Those kind of conversations can now be understood by the masses a little bit more. And that's ultimately the step in which you want MLS to progress to. That's absolutely exciting for the league to take this step. Is it as far as we want them to go? Absolutely not. There are still so many gray areas when it comes to allocation money, especially. That's the big issue, that MLS is so not transparent on allocation money, meaning they specify in the roster rules certain things, like a bucket of general allocation, a bucket of targeted allocation money that each team gets per year. They specify things like, for a transfer, you get to convert up to $1.2 million into GAM. In the new roster rules that will hopefully be ratified by the MLSPA, that will become $3 million per year. These things are known, but gray areas like teams get allocation money for missing the playoffs. Teams get allocation money for winning MLS Cup. Teams get allocation money for winning CONCACAF Champions Cup matches. Random stuff like this, but nothing's ever specified. So you have no clear insight into exactly how much allocation money a team has, how much GAM they've stockpiled, because GAM does not expire. And even though we're seeing things like TAM players being listed for Joachim Nilsson, Tomas Ostrak, and Tim Parker, we don't know how much targeted allocation money is being put on those players. It's all a guess, if you want to guess. You know how much teams are given at the beginning of the year. You may know ballpark how much they have, but there is 0% chance that any single non-MLS front office person can accurately make a guess at how much allocation money each one of these teams have at their disposal. And so that's one of the reasons why the Inter Miami equation could make sense, but it's hard for any fan to really think that it does, because you're seeing them splash all of this TAM money, all of these less than just slightly under DP money, splashing the DP cash for Miami is the easy part. That's free money. You spend as much as you want on Messi and Sergio Busquets, but Jordi Alba and Luis Suarez, how does Miami have so much TAM? We don't know. Gotta have to take their word for it, and that's part of the problem. So I that's the next step they eventually need to get to, is opening up the books, figuring out how they can do that with the MLSPA, and that's probably going to be a longer term process. I have no hopes of that happening anytime soon. In the chat, Doc 10484 says, would City get GAM for Isak Jensen's buyout option like it was a transfer? They would probably get something. I mean, it's a loan with an option of purchase, so he would be transferred out. At the end of the day, he's under contract with St. Louis City. This would be a transfer. I will never know, probably until we see rumors float about how much Viborg paid for him, because that's not something the club releases. They don't release transfer amounts. If you remember, they didn't release anything about Nico Gioacchini. The $2 million with an escalator up to 4 was reported by multiple sources, and I'm looking for the same thing for Jensen. We will get something for him. It's not vastly that different than a straight up transfer, because he's under contract with us until I think 2027, if I read that right. Yeah, option is 2027. So we would be getting compensated for him. And that would play into the potential new rules of you can get up to $3 million per year converted to GAM. So we don't get straight GAM, but the amount we get is converted into GAM in some way, shape, or form. The other thing I get asked is, of these transfer fees, of the things we receive for Nico Gioacchini, or what if Sam goes, or Isak Jensen's transfer? We know we can convert some into GAM, but what do we do with the rest? The rest is at the club's discretion, but it cannot be applied directly to player spending related to the salary cap, related to allocation money. In player terms, what it can be used for is, maybe now, if you're a club, I don't know if City looks at it this way, but we know that we kind of have an inkling that they're wanting to be self-sustaining, probably in how they develop players, they sell them, and they reinvest into the player pool. So transfers, while you might not be able to directly apply money to GAM in that way, you could still put it in a DP bucket of sorts. And you say, okay, this $2 million maybe that Nico Gioacchini got on top of his base amount, let's say he does get up to the 4 million, which I doubt he will because he hasn't seen much action this year. They can put that in a DP player bucket. It's all operationally how the team wants to manage this. And again, nothing that we're ever going to know, but I would like to think that a club like St. Louis that puts such a big emphasis on developing players, being smart with their money, some may see it as cheap, but being smart with how they spend after just dumping all this cash on the private stadium and building the facility and the district, I think they're wanting their sporting organization to pay for itself. You develop players, you sell them, you reinvest, you bring on higher dollar players, rinse and repeat until you're building yourself up to a point where you can start to splash some serious cash on designated players. That all depends on how well we're able to sell. So Nico Gioacchini, Isak Jensen, potentially Sam Adeniran or AZ Jackson, any other player, always a benefit no matter how we can convert it to GAM or not. And with that, I think I'm out of roster profile information. So I'm going to call it. Thank you so much for joining me on the wind down here on Flyover Footy, the roster profile. I meant to put on my nerdy glasses before this, but I just got too into it, too excited going into it. But this is my professor look. If you're looking at it on stream, got my nice blue light glasses. Thank you for joining me. This has been fun to talk about this, and it's been cathartic to me to get it out there. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you haven't, let me know, and I might not do this, but I think it's enjoyable to get this out there every once in a while, especially on a day like today where the roster profile is newsworthy, noteworthy. Depending on how much you've been paying attention, it may be news, it may not be. I don't know. Thank you again for joining me on Flyover Footy. I appreciate you all for listening, watching. Thank you so much. Go City against Houston, and we'll talk to y'all later. Oh, Chris Gebhardt, thank you. May 4th, 9 Mile Party. Yes, 9 Mile Garden Supporters Party. I don't know if that'll make it into the pod, but I am saying this on the live stream. So May 4th, supporters group, every supporters group recognized by the club is going to be out there. So show up to 9 Mile while the club's away. May the 4th be with you. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.